Hi everyone, welcome to my review of the 6-for audio Volur. This is a $2,500 IM that's supposed to supersede and be an upgrade over the very well-loved 6-for audio Neos. So the Neos were a nice complement to the U12Ts, the U12Ts being a slightly drier and slightly more boring affair. Whereas the Neo was more exciting in the sense that it had greater punch and slam, a thicker mid-range, so it had more, a more richer tones, more note weight, etc. The U12T is, of course, a household name, and a lot of people, sort of like maxing out at the U12T level of IMs. I have never been a huge fan of the U12T ever since I've experienced better IMs, and I find the U12T very staid, very boring, and even with the more, punchy Apex modules, I've never really enjoyed the U12T. I've always felt the Neo was a slightly more fun IM, or a substantially more fun IM, and perhaps even a better IM for my use cases. This takes the Neo and then dials that performance up to a 14. So, first of all, this is the accessorization. It's a pretty standard affair in terms of its case and all that. I got this from Bloom Audio, so I do want to take you guys to Bloom Audio's website in case you're not acquainted with Bloom Audio, so that's a little later. But in terms of accessorization, you get your usual plethora of tips, like you get your silicone tips of different sizes, and you get your foam tips. I've never really been a fan of the foam tip sort of situation because they break down over time. They collect a lot of, earwax and all that stuff. So it's not exactly hygienic for me either. And ultimately, I have always liked to tip roll, which I have with these IMs. And I've settled on a few tips that I'll showcase perhaps, or show you guys rather. Faceplates are beautiful. They have this sort of, bluish, purplish theme going on. The logo pretty visible, and you have your Apex modules that you can switch out as usual. They're super duper comfy. They fit in your ears perfectly, perhaps one of the most comfortable IMs on the planet. And they have the usual janky cable, which I think is inside this or under this. And if you must see this cable, this is what the cable looks like. It is effing terrible, and you just throw away this cable if you want to keep this IM, but of course you keep the cable if you want to sell the IM at some point. So what does this sound like? Of course, guys, I do want to disclaim that you might also want to stick around to the end of this because I will take you guys through comparisons, select ones, with other IMs like the Aroma Audio Jewel, which is my favorite, of course, the Trifecta, which is in a similar price range, and the AKVE Aura, which is an amazing limited edition IM, slightly more expensive, but worth talking about nonetheless, and a slightly cheaper IM, the Campfire Super Moons. Okay. Now, before I talk about all that, I just want to take you guys through the frequency response graph of the Volur. Now, you see different colors here because you get different tuning profiles with the different Apex modules. The blue one, which has the most amount of bass shelf and will sound the warmest, is the M20 Apex module, followed by the red, which is M15, and then, of course, the M12 is the green, and this beige colored one, the one that looks like fecal matter in terms of its coloration, this is perhaps, of course, clearly the least bassy and the most analytical sort of tonal profile. So you can get this IM to go all the way from uber bassy to analytical. I love the fact that the mid-range is not as intrusive, so it's far lower than the bass shelf for most of these tuning profiles, and that means that it never gets shouty. The U12T also had a slightly recessed upper mid range, which I liked. And then it has a bit of a scoop here, and then around 5 kilohertz, 4 to 5 kilohertz, you get a bit of a peak, and you get a bit of a peak around 8 kilohertz. These peaks will not be very ostensible or audible, rather. And then you get this Mount Everest after 15 kilohertz, which people are claiming is really, really airy. It is airy, but this is not something you'll hear, because this is around, I think, 18 kilohertz, and most people's hearing will sort of cap out before that, and even if you can hear this, it will just aid the sense of staging, imaging, and spaciousness, which it does have in droves. So it does, to some extent, sound like it graphs, except it doesn't sound like it's as airy as this graph would suggest. Not to suggest it's not airy. It's plenty airy. It's just not as airy as this suggests. And so it's not going to be a deal breaker for, I think, most of you, if not all of you. So tuning-wise, I would even say it's a safe choice. It's not as boring as U12T, because it has a dynamic driver, so that's worth keeping in mind. The dynamic driver here is fantastic. So let me just take you through. It's the Bloom Audio website, which I think will be useful for well, of course, Bloom Audio, and of course the rest of you who just want to get a sense of its technical specifications and what have you. So Bloom Audio carries a whole bunch of stuff, guys. You see this Dan Clark Audio E3, which is getting a lot of love, which I have not yet reviewed. Now, if I had to go into IMs, I'd go to portable, of course. I'd go to universal IMs, and I get all of this. And they're actually selling an open box for $2,100. I wish I had known. In any case, so this is the product page, of course. It's a 10 driver universal hybrid IM. And so it's got, its gold Apex models included, the M12 for a limited amount of time. Insofar as the 10 drivers go, they have 2 dynamic drivers, 9mm dynamic drivers, 7 BAs, and 1 TIA for treble. I'm sorry. And so this is Bloom's take on it. So what is my take on it? I've shown you the graph. So my take on it is that despite having a dynamic driver, despite having a 9.2mm dynamic driver, and despite being proclaimed to be this bass punch king and this rock and metal sort of IM, I feel like the bass is it's not as soft as the U12T, but somehow 6-4 Audio IMs don't really give me that tactile, punchy bass that I get from 4 Audio IMs or even the Campfire Trifecta. So the bass here is pretty good. The bass here is, I think a lot of people like it and even call it fantastic, perhaps. I am not a big fan of the bass punch element because I feel like there's something rounded and soft going around the edges of notes when it slams, like when a kick drum comes through or a bass guitar comes through. It doesn't sound as authoritative. It sounds fine, but I'm just used to. I'm a bit of a bass head. I nitpick the texture of the bass instruments a bit as well. So the bass is fine. It's a dynamic driver bass. Quite clearly, it's not a BA bass. It doesn't sound as fast and as transient, or as a fleeting and transient response, or as just lacking in decay as BA drivers can. It's still a dynamic driver bass, but what you might not get from the graph is that it won't slam as hard or be as succulent in the bass as something like a Campfire Trifecta. Because the Trifecta or any other 4 Audio IM will give you the sort of bass that I find more realistic. Of course, the Trifecta is $3,300, but you can even get, I think, a more realistic bass from the cheaper Campfire Supermoon, which I think is at $1,000. So the Supermoon has a more authoritative bass. Now mid bass is a bit interesting because it does not have a whole lot of mid bass. So it does, in some senses, the bass can also sound ever so slightly lean. I'm sorry, which is not a deal breaker for a lot of you because a lot of you, I think, might have grown up on a diet of Harman, so you might not miss the mid bass as much. But I do think that I tend to gravitate towards IMs that have slightly more mid-bass. The vocal performance here is actually very underrated because I feel like this does vocals better than the U12T, especially with the M20 modules and other modules that give this IM an overall shade of warmth. The vocals come through in a very beautiful way. It has a certain lucidity and languidity to the vocals that I really like about 6-4 Audio IMs. The mid-range, I think, is in many ways as good as the bass, although the bass is being made out to be the star of the show. And then the treble is fantastic, guys. The treble is fantastic because it's not absent in the lower treble and mid treble. The absence would rob electric guitars of their attack. The absence would rob a lot of instruments of clarity. The absence would, I think, just rob a lot of instruments of their overall tonal character and richness. However, the air frequencies, which it does have in copious amounts, I do think makes for a fantastic staging, which is a good segue into talking about its technical performance because it is a quite resolving IM. I find it to be more resolving than the U12T. Staging, like I've talked about, is very impressive. It's wide, it's holographic, it's got a bit of depth, and it layers pretty well. Timbre is pretty nice. I think 6-4 Audio IMs do have a very nice timbre. It's this rich, sort of softish timbre. And then finally, in terms of dynamics, which is a sense of punch and slam, it does have punch and slam, so it's fun. It's a fun IM. However, I'm spoiled by IMs that I've talked about already, like the Campfire Trifecta, like the Campfire Supermoon. So I do find a bit of the slam to be ever so slightly. Well, let me put it this way: it doesn't slam like I want my IMs to slam, but it slams way better than any BA IM that you can find in the market. Quick comparisons: it doesn't really compare well with the Aroma Audio Jewels, because Aroma Audio Jewels are in a different price class, and they are far more resolving, far better imaging, and far better everything. Perhaps the Volurs will out punch and out slam the Jewels, because the Jewels are not exactly known for their punch and slam. In terms of the cheaper Campfire Super Moons, which is around $1,000, this does out slam the Volur. However, this does beat the Super Moon in every other trait. And finally, I did also talk about the Trifecta. The Trifectas are incredible IMs and probably my second favorite. Although I feel like they're pretty close to resolution, because the Trifecta is not particularly resolving despite being higher priced. But the Trifecta does sound a bit wider, does sound a bit more holographic, and it just punches and slams and just has a bass presentation and tonal presentation that I just love. So I would pick this over this. And I will drop a separate review of the AK Vision Ears Aura, which are some fantastic monitors. The Auras, I think, are superior IMs to the Volur. However, the Auras, I think, also don't have a whole lot of punch and slam despite having a dynamic driver base. And I do think this perhaps punches a little more than the Aura. The Aura might be more resolving and ever so slightly wider. So that's that. But it's a more expensive IM at around $4,000. So who's this for? I feel like this is for people who wanted more excitement or more bass presence or more bass tactility than the U12T offers. So this could be a nice upgrade to the U12T. It's definitively going to be an upgrade to the Neos. And in general, if you like the 6.4 audio sound, because a lot of you love the 6.4 audio sound, their softness in the edges of notes, how they do treble thanks to the TIA technology that they have going on. If you are one of those, I mean, then this could be a no-brainer. Yes, if you like rock, this could be your jam, of course, especially if you can't afford or don't want to afford or buy a 6.4 audio TIA Forte Blanche. Because the Blanche, I think, punches a bit harder and has a little more authoritative sub bass. So that's it, guys. Overall, a wonderful set of IMs. Not perfect, but wonderful. And a shout out to Bloom Audio for their wonderful service and getting it out to me very quickly, especially to Andrew. I love your review work, man, and I've enjoyed the customer service you provide. And good luck to Bloom Audio, and good luck to 6.4 Audio, of course. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for the next one. Bye-bye.